plastic. It's designed to last, yet we treat it as disposable. And somehow millions of tons of it is ending up in the ocean. What can we do to stop it? This is Roundtable with me, Juliet Mann. The UN is calling it a planetary crisis and predicts there'll be as much plastic in the sea as fish in 25 years. Plastic is almost impossible to avoid. Are alternative materials the answer, or even possible on a global scale?
The world's oceans are home to a finely balanced ecosystem, upon which humanity depends for much of its food and economic prosperity. But human wastefulness is disrupting this harmony, and the clock is ticking for us to clean up our act.
Whether it's shellfish, whether it's salt, whether it's water, we're seeing plastic everywhere now.
Plastic has a direct and deadly impact on our oceans. And globally, we dump more than 8 million tons of it into our oceans every year.
Some of the turtles chew plastic as if it is jellyfish.
Plastic use has increased 20-fold in the last 50 years, and it's believed that by 2050, plastic could outweigh fish in our oceans. Much of it is in the form of microplastic, smaller than your fingernail, but accounting for as much as 236,000 metric tons. The United States and the United Kingdom throw away 550 million plastic straws every day. Estimates suggest that worldwide, up to 1 trillion plastic bags are discarded each year, and humans produce almost 20,000 plastic bottles every second. At a UN summit in Kenya this month, nations agreed to a non-binding deal to stop plastic waste entering oceans. And governments agreed to establish a task force to advise on combating plastic pollution. Initiatives like the Seabin project are being touted as among ways to mitigate the problem, and biodegradable alternatives are beginning to challenge traditional plastic products.
As a global community, we must protect and value vital marine ecosystems rather than treating the oceans as an endless resource to be exploited and as a dumping ground for our waste.
Ultimately, the solution to the plastic problem lies in the way we use it in our everyday lives. Will our attitude to cheap, disposable products deprive future generations of pristine oceans? Are we still able to turn the tide?
Joining us at the Roundtable is Emily Penn, a sailor and environmentalist, Risa Morimoto, a specialist in economics at SOAS, University of London, ocean photographer Andy Hughes, and Paul De Zylva, a senior campaigner at Friends of the Earth. Well, thanks all very much for joining us. Let's talk a little bit about how you all came to be so passionate about the issue of plastics in the sea. Now, you're a sailor, so what came first? Conquering the ocean or saving the planet?
So I actually had a job opportunity in Australia, and I wanted to get there from England without taking an aeroplane. And I ended up on this amazing trip around the world where I unexpectedly started seeing all of this plastic in our oceans and stopping at small islands and finding these remote parts of the Pacific were covered in plastic as well. And after that, I couldn't really look back.
Dr. Risa, how did you come to focus on this topic?
Yes, so as a child, I grew up in a small town, and I was always interested in being in the nature. So I was thinking how I can contribute to live in harmony with nature. So I wanted to become an academic and concentrated on working and doing research on environmental issues.
You were a surfer, weren't you?
I still surf a little bit, although I'm getting a little bit older now, but I still enjoy it. And one day I remember getting out of the sea and walking back to the car. And you know, when I was in the bath, I had something kind of stuck in my palm of my hand. I remember thinking, what was it, like a splinter? And when I actually took it out, it was a tiny little piece of plastic. So that was 30 years ago.
Paul, before we talk about how your campaign and where you stand on plastics in the ocean, how did you become so passionate about it?
Well, it's more mundane than my colleagues today. I live in a town and I do a fair amount of work on restoring urban rivers, and part of the problem there is that they are they're full of plastic and lots of other waste. And if you've got plastic in your streets that hasn't been discarded properly, or it will end up in rivers and it will end up in the sea. So if you sort out the plastic in your street, wherever you live, you don't need to live by the sea, then actually you'll be preventing plastic from getting to the ocean because it gets there from all the rivers.
What's the biggest problem? What's the biggest plastic issue, if you like?
That's a really hard question because it's very hard to, there are so many different plastics. When we talk about plastic, we're talking about lots of different types of plastic. Hard plastic, very like packaging, which is much softer. So lots of different types of plastic go into the products we buy and consume and then throw away. And so it's hard to assume there's one solution. Certainly from a consumer point of view, the issue, as Andy's talked about, is this problem of single use of plastic, whether it's wrapping paper, we're coming up to Christmas, whether it's water bottles or plastic packaging around food. There has to be some solutions and interventions, and I think there are, and it's a mix of government intervention, business innovation, as well as consumer demand.
So is this a developed world problem, or is it something we're seeing all around the world?
Actually, that's an interesting point, because it's not only the problem from developed world, because a recent study by McKinsey and Ocean Conservatory, last year's study 2016, they argue that more than 50% of those ocean leakage of plastic come from just 5 countries: China, Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam. So you can see this huge concentration of specific areas which produce those plastics, and then that leaks into the ocean. So this is actually quite locally specific issues, but at the same time, it's a global problem.
And when it all leaks into the oceans, what's the problem there? It's affecting wildlife, but it's also ultimately affecting humans too.
Exactly. So all of that plastic makes its way down into the ocean. Eventually everything runs downhill and ends up in the sea. And from there it then meets these ocean currents and moves into accumulation zones that we call gyres. So that's what we've spent the last decade going out to explore, to try and find out what's there really and quantify how much. And
so what is there?
So, well, plastic, unfortunately, in literally every single gyre now that we've been to, and even everywhere in between, from the poles all the way to the equator. But what we're finding that was initially surprising is that the plastic's breaking down into these tiny fragments, what we call microplastics, so smaller than your little fingernail. And so most of the plastic at sea is that size, which means you can't really see it by satellite image, or even when you look at the surface of the water with your eye.
Does that make it harder to clean up too?
Exactly. Yeah, so we take a fine net through the water to be able to sample it, but you can't clean it up that way because it's the same size as the zooplankton, the algae, all of the organic matter that also lives on the surface of the ocean.
So the fish eat it, and we eat the fish, and it's in our systems too. But you talk about these gyres. What exactly are they? Yeah,
so that's basically a gyre is the word that we give to that accumulation zone. Because of the rotating system of currents, we have a great big clockwise rotation in each of our northern hemisphere oceans and anti-clockwise in the south. And then there's an area in the middle that's really calm. And so all the plastic wants to rush to that calm spot. So we find those areas are much, much more dense with plastic than anywhere else. But unfortunately, we're still finding plastic everywhere.
And that's something you've seen, haven't you, in terms of, well, you've covered it when you've taken your photographs.
Yeah.
We're talking here the scientific and the technical side of it, but you're seeing it on beaches up and down.
Well, I travelled to Alaska a few years ago to some very remote parts of the Alaskan wilderness, and it was about 2 years after the tsunami, the Japanese tsunami, and I came across the things we were talking about there, the small pieces of plastic, and even huge floats, fishing floats that were like 8 foot high. I mean, massive objects, but also kind of those human things like shoes. I mean, it's quite sad. It's quite tragic to find, a pair of trainers that probably over a space of a few years, gets regurgitated. So there's not only the kind of like this idea that where all our stuff's drifting and dissipating and leaking from our culture, but also in the sense I'm interested in, nature's giving us these warnings. So a tsunami is a kind of a natural, disaster, but in a sense what happens is the sea accumulates this stuff, it throws it back to us, it kind of regurgitates it back to us. And I think that idea of that kind of regurgitation is what's creating a lot of anxiety and a lot of stress.
That's a good point. It's that we think we're getting rid of the plastic when we dispose of it, but actually it's coming back at us.
Right.
So it's a message in the bottle for modern times, isn't it?
In a way, yeah.
And we've definitely just seen with the hurricanes, Hurricane Maria and going through the Caribbean, the amount of plastic that those hurricanes pulled off those islands, that even if you think you're putting it in a landfill or you think you're putting your plastic to recycling, millions of tons of it then got washed into the sea.
Let's talk about that, because certainly in the United Kingdom there's been a big campaign against against plastic bags and the move towards reusing. There are campaigns in other countries around the world where having plastic carrying receptacles is quite frowned upon. Is it about education? Is it about changing culture?
It's about all of those things. I think people want to feel more in control of the choices they make, and they're very often given false choices. Just consume more stuff in a really bad way and hope the problem is solved. Well, that's not going to work. I think the issue of our oceans, I think the time has come for this as an issue. Plastics tells us something about how we're mistreating our natural environment. There are lots of other things that are wrong with our marine environment as well, but plastics, I think, brings it alive for people. People cannot conceive that if they do buy a water bottle at a concert or for a train journey, and they do dispose of it responsibly, the chances are it will still end up somewhere on our planet, not at the local rubbish dump or even being reused. And I think that speaks to people's sense that something's not right and they actually do want it put right. And they want to play their role in it, and they can make some consumer choices. But government needs to act. So as you say, in the UK, government is considering the idea of a tax on single-use plastics. There are companies now that are starting to look at their whole supply chains and their design of their products and the materials they're using and how they can design out waste and give their customers or citizen consumers.
So what kind of companies?
Well,
big brands, household names?
Marks & Spencer, a pretty well-known brand, are starting to look at this whole issue of when we talk about plastics, you're not just talking about one type of plastic, and they haven't done it yet, but they have said, we want to be using one type of plastic, because if you use one type of plastic, you can use it and reuse it and reuse it, and you can also control and track it far better. So those type of debates and discussions are taking place, and I think they're going to drive innovation. They're going to drive public desire for change.
You're talking about innovation there. What role can technology play? Because in the past, when we've heard about recycling, repurposing some of these plastics, it's ended up so expensive that it hasn't made business sense.
Yes, exactly. The technology would play an important role. Of course, technology alone is not a solution, but technology, in the sense as it's suggested, those large multinational companies today follows this life cycle approach and circular economy approach, meaning that try to use the material in the longer life, so it's not just you finish using the products and dispose it. Instead, reuse the product. So the companies now look at how we can reuse that already used consumer products back again into the loop of the production. So the technology plays an important role here because of the innovation in materials, the new alternative materials, or innovation in design. And also in developing countries, for example, why there's so much plastics leaking into the ocean, partly because they have this lack of waste management infrastructure. So here again, the role of technology, much more high-tech, modern waste treatment system, recycling system. For example, China has the world's largest recycling facilities. So instead of using old facilities which cannot sort or recycle certain plastic products, the technology again could improve the sorting, collection rate, and the recycling rate. And also again, waste to energy technology could also again play an important role as well.
So it's about finding the right bits of technology to work. But you've been in the ocean, you've sailed across the world. It's huge. Do you sometimes think this is too big to know where to start?
I think when it comes to trying to clean up the mess that we've already made, it does seem like maybe not an impossible task, but probably not the best place to start. You know, going out there and trying to pick up these trillions of tiny fragments is expensive.
It's not going to happen, is it?
Resource intensive, exactly. And I mean, 70% of the surface of our planet is ocean, and it's spread all over it. So for me, it's all about trying to get as close to the source of the problem as possible. So rather than focusing at cleanup, we heard about some ways like maybe waste to energy is kind of dealing with that waste. But for me, even, you know, I want to get closer to the source than that. It's about circular economy. It's about eliminating the plastic in the first place. It's standardization of that plastic. If we only use one material, we're actually then designing for a true circular economy.
And starting on your doorstep, you were mentioning how you work on urban rivers, and rather than thinking about it as a big global oceanic problem, starting with yourself.
I think making it, I think this is already happening, people associating themselves with the problem but wanting the solution, it's almost a sea change, if you like. And I think politicians and businesses are picking up on it. People don't, singular action, I would never stop anyone from taking individual action and saying it's not worth it. I always think it's worth it. Is it going to solve the whole problem? No, people need help. But sure, there is a fundamental crisis of a significant number of people who still think it's okay just to drop litter and not dispose of it properly. That causes problems. It costs society hugely. It costs taxpayers. There is then the issue of better product design and actually designing out some of these things. So I would say, stop single-use bottles now. Just do it. Have the political will and the gumption to do it. And suddenly we'll probably realise that our rights have not been infringed. We're perfectly able, we're sentient beings, and we're getting on with life without plastic bottles. And we'll tackle another problem another day. So some of these things are fixable.
Doesn't it depend on the water supply of where you come from? Because for years and years, all tourists have been told, drink bottled water, well, I mean, don't take it from the tap. This turns all of that on its head.
I know, but I mean, there's an element of truth in that, I suppose, but also, you know, we've been told that, you know, in the rich West, we're told we need to drink, 1.5 litres of water a day. So, you know, the systems that have now kind of introduced this idea of the commodification of water, and I won't mention any particular companies, you know, but the idea that, you see, water's sexy, it's clear, you can make associations with water. It's sexy, it helps you be a better sportsman, it reinvigorates you. It's the marketer's dream. You know, if we think back to Perrier, you know, when you used to get the fizzy bottle water, it was this kind of special event. You know, we spent hundreds of millions of pounds in this country, in many countries, for 100 years to provide safe, clean tap water to your house. You don't need to purchase it.
Most drinking water in Europe is perfectly fine.
It's, you know...
So what's going to happen? Can you see a day then where we don't have a bottle of water in our bag?
Yeah, I can see the day coming, as I say, I think maybe within the next 5 years, If there's enough will to use, you know, the arts, culture, politics, advocacy, to kind of educate people to think, well, actually, you know, walking down the street with a bottle of, you know, water is like going into a school and lighting a cigarette. It's like it's going to have to that level of, you know, unacceptability really, that smoking a cigarette and drinking a bottle of water. There's some comparable similar ideas there.
So what's your vice? Bottled water. Well, what about the supermarkets? What would you like to see them doing?
Yeah, so I think they, in a way, have the biggest challenge. You know, there's a lot of other companies at the moment who are saying, we're going to go single-use plastic free, which is brilliant, and they should do that. But the supermarkets do have the hardest job. So food packaging, you know, this is our biggest challenge. It's very easy to get rid of water bottles. There's actually no excuse for it now.
I think they're going to. I think the supermarkets are going to respond because, I mean, for instance, social media, you know, and Facebook and Twitter. I mean, my sort of social media phone this morning is like on fire with the things that are being sent to me, like crazy things of like somebody at Carrefour in France managed to segment an orange and place the individual segments in plastic packaging. I mean, that's crazy to segment an orange and wrap it in black plastic. I mean, you know, the supermarkets that engage in those kind of ridiculous packaging measures, that's, you know, the consumer really has to not purchase that stuff.
Yes, I think I think the consumers' pressure on the industries to change the more responsible production behavior, I think would play an important role.
Where is that going to come from? Is that going to come from campaigners, from environmentalists,
education,
or is it going to come from government?
I think it has to be from both, and the government, and also even at higher level, at a global action.
Companies need to decide where they want to sit on this. Not all companies are the same, and the companies of the future that deserve to be, you know, selling stuff to us are going to be the companies that innovate around this, that do take product design seriously. They don't just shove us the next thing, as you say, and play us off like a marketing ploy. They actually say these issues are sufficiently serious for us to position ourselves and our company over here. And if the rest of the market wants to continue with the old thinking, the 20th century ways, then great. But we're going to be a market leader, and we're going to innovate around that. And you trace all these issues over the years. There's always been enough of the leadership within businesses, whether it's retailers or others, supply chains, that want to market lead, and they're prepared to show the way. And those that refuse to change, frankly, they don't deserve a future, and governments need to have the backbone to act on them.
Some governments have got that backbone. Talk to me about some of those who have made some quite bold changes.
Some governments, for example, the situation in developing countries is slightly different. In terms of those plastic bag bans and taxes, interestingly, places like Mauritania or Kenya in Africa, they ban all the plastic bags in the retail, both production and sales, and they impose a significantly expensive fine to have this drastic change and impose the ban on the plastic bags. Partly because the problem there is more significant. And coming back to the story about bottled water, the situation in developing countries is opposite because of the population growth, urbanizations, and increasing per capita consumption of plastic and consumer goods. So there's more and more demand in plastic packaged produce, such as water. Because of the urbanization, more in developing countries require those small sachet water they have to purchase. The most vulnerable people who live under a couple of dollars per day. So to tackle these global issues, we have to look at those regional, local specific problems and issues, and we have to make specific analysis.
So specific analysis for specific problems in specific regions.
Yes, because they have a different environment and different conditions.
If there was one thing you could do, go around the table very quickly in a nutshell, there's one thing that you could do tomorrow to change the consumption of plastics, what would it be?
I would go to supermarkets and get them to eliminate at least 50% of the plastic they currently have on their shelves, because we do have the solutions for those today.
How about you?
Yes, I have the same. For example, those unnecessary plastic, something like straws. Within European countries, 28 countries, 36 billion drinking straw is consumed per year.
So your tip to the supermarkets, no plastic straws.
I think when you look at banana, you know, you need to eat the banana in its skin. It doesn't need to be wrapped individually. And an avocado's got a perfectly good skin that can be delivered to a supermarket in a cardboard box. It doesn't need individual packaging.
And how about you?
Tackle single plastic use in all its forms.
Tax it.
You can tax it, but you can innovate it around
Yeah.
it. If you send the right signals through taxation, you will get business to innovate faster than it is at the moment.
And that's the speed that we need. Well, thank you to all of the panellists.
you.
You've been absolutely fantastic. It's been a super discussion. Thank you very much. Well, reducing single-use plastic may be the only way we can keep it out of the ocean. But can we work towards a world without plastic bottles and containers? This has been Roundtable with me, Juliet Mann. Thanks for watching.